Three women go to bed after a night of celebration. Their cars are still outside. Their purses are left on the floor. Their dog is still inside the house. But by morning, all three are gone. Without a sound, without a trace, and without a single piece of physical evidence explaining how or why. More than 30 years later, no one has ever been charged. And the question isn't whether they left voluntarily. It's who took them and how they vanished so completely. On the morning of June 7th, 1992, three women vanished from a small home on East Delmar Street in Springfield, Missouri. 47-year-old Sherrill Levitt, her 19-year-old daughter Suzie Streeter, and Suzie's friend, 18-year-old Stacy McCall, were last known to be inside that house sometime after 2 a.m. By mid-morning, friends and family realized something was wrong. What followed was one of the most baffling missing persons investigations in American history, an investigation that remains open to this day. Before we get into today's story, I want to take a moment to bring us back to what the world looked like in the summer of 1992. Grunge music was taking over the airwaves. Nirvana's Nevermind album had been released the year before, and if you wanted to listen to it, you'd play it on a CD, or maybe even a cassette tape. Wayne's World, Basic Instinct, Sister Act, and Batman Returns had just hit theaters. And if you wanted to watch a movie at home, you didn't stream it. You bought or rented a videotape. Shows like The Real World and Barney were just beginning to air. That spring, the Los Angeles riots had shaken the country, following the acquittal of the police officers involved in the beating of Rodney King. But despite everything happening nationally, daily life felt very different. This was a world without social media, without algorithms. Most people didn't even have cell phones. If you needed to reach someone, you called their house and hoped they were home to answer. We didn't carry little computers in our pockets that we now call cell phones. In fact, many households didn't have a computer at all, and the internet wasn't yet part of everyday life. If you wanted to take a photo, you used a film camera, and then you waited, sometimes days, for those photos to be developed at a drugstore. This was an analog world. Life moved slower, and nowhere was that more true than in the Ozarks, in Springfield, Missouri. In 1992, Springfield had a population of just over 140,000 people. It sat in the heart of the Bible Belt, surrounded by quiet neighborhoods and a strong sense of community. People felt safe here. Many didn't even lock their doors. And it's in this setting, what most considered a safe, ordinary community, that our story takes place. Before we get into it, if you're new here, my name's Amanda, and this is Their Voice Matters, where we discuss true crime stories with clarity, care, and respect for the people behind them. If that's the kind of coverage you're looking for, consider subscribing to the channel or following the podcast. Before we continue, I want to briefly explain how I'll be speaking about the women in this case. Throughout this episode, you'll hear me refer to Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy in the past tense. That's simply because these details come from their lives before they disappeared over 30 years ago. Their case remains unsolved, and officially they are still missing. Sherrill Levitt was born on November 1st, 1944. In 1992, she was 47 years old. She worked as a hairstylist at New Attitudes Hair Salon on West Sunshine Street, where she was deeply loved by her clients. She had more than 250 regular customers, many of whom had followed her for years. Her boss, Joe Tate, described her as a meticulous employee who took real pride in her work. Sherrill was known for going above and beyond, bringing in cookies for clients and even sending them birthday cards. She was described as a private person, but also warm, friendly, and welcoming. People enjoyed being around her. She was fun, nurturing, and made others feel comfortable. Physically, Sherrill was very petite, just 5 feet tall, or about 152 centimeters, and around 110 pounds, or 50 kilograms. I don't always include height and weight, but in this case, that detail will become important later. She had short, bleach blonde hair and brown eyes. Originally from Seattle, Washington, Sherrill moved her family to Springfield in 1980. She also had a son, Bart, who was 8 years older than Suzie. Their relationship was strained, and he moved in and out of their lives over the years. After finalizing her divorce in 1989, Sherrill and Suzie needed to start fresh once again. And in April 1992, just 2 months before they disappeared, Sherrill achieved something she was incredibly proud of. She purchased her very own home. The house was located at 1717 East Delmar Street in central Springfield. It wasn't large, but it sat right on the edge of a quiet, desirable neighborhood. Sherrill was excited. She immediately began working on small projects around the house, slowly turning it into a home for herself and her daughter. Suzie Streeter, known to everyone as Suzie, was born on March 9, 1973. She was 19 years old. Like her mother, Suzie was petite. She stood about 5 feet 2 inches tall, or 157 centimeters, and weighed around 100 pounds, or 45 kilograms. She also had brown eyes and bleach blonde hair. People often remarked on how similar she and her mom looked. Suzie and Sherrill were extremely close. Friends said Suzie would sometimes cancel plans just to spend time with her mom. She was described as happy, bubbly, outgoing, and friendly, someone who was approachable and easy to talk to. By all accounts, she was simply a good person. Suzie worked at a local movie theater and was finishing her senior year at Kickapoo High School. In the spring of 1992, she was just about to graduate, and one of her friends at school was a girl named Stacy McCall. Stacy McCall was born on April 23, 1974, to her parents Janice and Stu McCall. She was described as warm and inviting, with a bright smile that people remembered long after meeting her. Stacy worked as a receptionist at Springfield Gymnastics and also modeled wedding gowns for a local bridal shop. Like Suzie, she was petite, about 5 feet 3 inches tall, or 160 centimeters, and around 120 pounds, or 54 kilograms. She had dark blonde hair, blue eyes, and a distinctive dimple in the center of her chin. According to Stacy's mother, Janice, she and Suzie had been very close in early elementary school. But when the McCall family moved away for a few years, that closeness faded. When the family eventually returned to Springfield, Suzie had found a new friend group, and Stacy had done the same. But just weeks before graduation, something changed. The girls reconnected. They began spending time together again, almost as if they were trying to make up for lost time. And that timing, that reconnection so close to the end of the school year, would become tragically significant. On Saturday, June 6, 1992, Suzie Streeter, Stacy McCall, and their classmates gathered at the Hammond Student Center for their high school graduation from Kickapoo High School. The ceremony began around 6 p.m. It was a night full of excitement and anticipation, the kind that comes with standing on the edge of adulthood. The girls had their entire lives ahead of them. Suzie planned to follow in her mother Sherrill's footsteps and pursue cosmetology. Stacy would be attending Missouri State University that fall. After the ceremony, the girls went their separate ways to celebrate with their families, with plans to meet up later that night to attend graduation parties with friends. Stacy went out to dinner with her family to a popular local restaurant, Ryan's Steakhouse. That evening, her parents gave her a graduation gift, a Cocker Spaniel puppy named Bubba. After returning home, where the family had a graduation cake for Stacy, they began taking photos. But she quickly grew impatient. She told her mom, Janice, quote, "Mom, I've had enough pictures. I need to go because I'm running late. I'm ready to go." Janice replied, quote, "Wait a minute, we didn't even cut your graduation cake." And Stacy responded, quote, "We'll cut it tomorrow." Suzie, on the other hand, stayed home with her mom. The two shared a pizza together, a quiet, ordinary evening before a night of celebration. Around 8:30 p.m., Suzie and Stacy met up at their friend Janelle Kirby's house in nearby Battlefield, Missouri. The plan was to attend a party next door, then head to another party before driving to Branson, a popular vacation destination about 50 minutes away. The idea was to stay overnight in a hotel in Branson and then spend the next day at Whitewater, the local water park. But as the night went on, the plan changed. It felt too late and too far to make the drive that night. Instead, the girls decided they would leave for Branson in the morning. They planned to stay at Janelle's house. That evening, Sherrill was home alone. She spent her time refurbishing a dresser, one of several small projects she'd been working on since moving into her new house. Between 9:30 and 11:15 p.m., she was also on the phone with her close friend Val. It was an ordinary night, a quiet one. Just Sherrill, her Yorkie named Cinnamon, and a friend on the other end of the line. Nothing seemed out of place. Around 10:30 p.m., Stacy called her mom, Janice. She explained that they weren't going to Branson that night after all, and that she'd be staying at Janelle's house instead. Janice was relieved. She'd been worried about the girls making such a long drive so late at night. Before hanging up, Stacy told her mom that she would call her the next morning before they headed out to go to Branson. Later that night, in the early morning hours of June 7th, Suzie and Stacy attended a party in southeast Springfield. The party grew loud, and around 1:50 a.m., police arrived to break it up. With the night winding down, the girls returned to Battlefield to pick up their cars, which they had left at Janelle's house where they planned to stay the night. But this wasn't an ideal situation. Janelle had family in town for her graduation, and the house was packed. Her mother, Kathy, had laid out pallets in the living room for the girls to sleep on, but that didn't look very comfortable. That's when another option started to make sense. Suzie had just received a brand new waterbed as a graduation gift from her mom. It sounded a lot better and a lot more comfortable than pallets on the floor. The girls decided they'd go to Suzie's house instead and call Janelle in the morning to finalize plans for heading to Branson. Kathy Kirby was already in bed by the time the girls left. She later recalled hearing Suzie say to Stacy, "Follow me to my house." And she heard Stacy respond, "Okay, I will." Those are the last words either girl is known to have spoken. Suzie and Stacy each got into their own cars and drove towards Suzie's house. They would have arrived sometime between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m. By 7:30 a.m., Janelle Kirby hadn't heard from Suzie or Stacy. That was unusual. They were supposed to call her to figure out plans to go to Branson that morning, so Janelle started calling Suzie's house. No answer. She called again. Still nothing. After several hours passed with no response, Janelle assumed the girls were just exhausted from the night before, partied out, and sleeping in. Around 12:30 p.m., Janelle and her boyfriend Mike decided to drive over to the house on East Delmar Street. At first glance, everything looked normal. Suzie and Stacy's cars were parked in the circular driveway in the front of the house. Sherrill's car was under the carport on the right side, but as Janelle and Mike approached the front door, something caught their attention. The glass globe covering the porch light had fallen and shattered across the front porch. The light bulb itself was still intact, but there was glass everywhere. That felt strange. Sherrill was known to be tidy and meticulous. If she had seen broken glass like that, she would have cleaned it up. Concerned that someone might step on it and get hurt, Janelle and Mike decided to sweep it up. There was a broom nearby, so Mike swept the glass and dumped it over the fence onto the neighboring property, which was a dentist's office. They knocked on the door. No answer. They knocked again, rang the doorbell. Still nothing. They looked through the windows. Everything appeared normal. They walked around to the backyard. No sign of anyone. When they returned to the front door, they tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. They went inside. What they found was confusing. The house was immaculate. Nothing appeared broken. There were no signs of a struggle. The beds looked like they had been slept in. Suzie's graduation cake, still uncut, was sitting in the refrigerator. But some things were clearly wrong. All three women's purses were lined up neatly near the steps leading down to Suzie's sunken bedroom. Sherrill and Suzie were both smokers, Sherrill a chain smoker, and yet their cigarettes and lighters had been left behind. In Suzie's room, the television was still on. Cinnamon, the family's Yorkie, was visibly upset. The women were gone, but their cars, purses, money, and personal items were all still there. While Janelle and Mike were inside the house, the phone rang. Janelle answered, thinking maybe it was one of the women calling to explain where they were. Instead, there was a male voice on the other end of the line. We don't know exactly what was said, but Janelle later described it as rude, lewd, and inappropriate. She hung up. At first, she assumed it was just a prank call. Sherrill and Suzie had received prank calls before. In a world without caller ID, this wasn't unheard of. But then the phone rang again. The same thing happened, and Janelle hung up once again. When the phone rang a third time, she didn't answer. The call went to the answering machine. Janelle and Mike left the house and drove around, checking nearby restaurants and other places they thought the women might have gone. They found nothing. They returned to the house later that day, still hoping the women would come home. They didn't. Earlier that morning, around 11 a.m., Stacy's mom Janice had grown frustrated. Stacy was responsible. She had promised to call before leaving for Branson. When she hadn't heard from Stacy, she called Janelle's house. Janelle's sister answered and said Stacy wasn't there. That didn't make sense. Stacy had said she would be staying at Janelle's house. Janice asked to speak with her mother, Kathy, who confirmed that she had not stayed there, but that she had gone to Suzie's house. After that call, Janice tried calling Suzie's house herself, but there was no answer. She left a voicemail asking Stacy to call her back. At this point, Janice was annoyed, but not panicked. This was 1992. You couldn't just reach people instantly. She assumed the girls had simply gone about their day. The McCall family and relatives who were in town for graduation went to a lake and spent the afternoon together. Throughout the day, word spread that no one could reach Sherrill, Suzie, or Stacy. Friends and acquaintances stopped by the house to check on them. By the end of the day, about 18 people had gone in and out of the home. By early evening, Janice was no longer irritated. She was scared. She had called the Levitt house repeatedly, leaving voicemail messages that became more and more frantic each time. She still hadn't heard from Stacy, and she didn't know where Susie's house was. Around 6:30 to 7 p.m., Janice learned that Janelle was at a local water park. She drove there to find her. When Janice asked why Janelle hadn't called her earlier, Janelle said, "I didn't want you to worry." Janelle gave Janice the address of the house on East Delmar Street. Janice arrived at the house around 9 p.m. Once inside, she immediately noticed things that terrified her. All 3 purses were still there, including Sherrill's, which contained nearly $900 in cash from her work at the salon. Adjusted for today, that would be around $2,100. In Sherrill's bedroom, Janice saw her eyeglasses sitting beside the bed. A book lay face down, as if it had been put down mid-read. In Susie's bedroom, stuffed animals were scattered across the floor. Janice noticed the clothes Stacy had worn the night before. Her shorts and bra neatly folded on top of her shoes. Her jewelry had been placed inside her shorts pockets. Nearby was the bikini Stacy planned to wear at the Branson Water Park. Then, Janice saw something she knew that her daughter would never leave without: Stacy's migraine medicine. Stacy suffered from debilitating migraines, and so she always carried her medication. The only items that were missing were the yellow shirt that Stacy had been wearing and her underwear. The beds looked like they had been slept in. Janice couldn't understand it. Why would her daughter leave the house like that? Janice later said, quote, "Well, it kept getting later and later, and I'm getting more and more worried. And we played the answering machine tape, and it had several things on it. And it had my voice on it 2 or 3 times. And it had a real rude thing from a man calling. And it had inappropriate innuendos. And Janelle had heard that and told us about it, and it was on there. And then I think there was another one that she answered, and she hung up." At some point, while replaying the messages, the crude voicemail from the man was deleted. Some believe it was accidental, while others believe the machine automatically erased messages after playback. Either way, it was gone. Janice knew something was wrong. She began calling anyone she could think of, asking if they'd heard from Sherrill, Suzie, or Stacy. No one had. She called her husband Stu and told him, quote, "There's something not right. Something is really wrong." Janice wanted to call the police, but she hesitated. The 911 system had only recently been implemented in Springfield, and the public had been repeatedly told that it was for emergencies only. The women were missing. People were worried. But was this an emergency? What if they showed up at any moment, saying they'd just forgotten to call? Eventually, Janice called the police department and reported the women missing. Officer Rick Bookout was the first officer to arrive. He spoke with Janice and walked through the house with her. In Susie's bedroom, they noticed that the blinds, which were closed, had 2 slats pulled apart, as if someone was looking out the window. Was it the girls or someone else? Officer Brian Galt arrived shortly after. Both officers agreed something didn't feel right. Bookout later said, quote, "She'd leave her house without a lot of things, but a smoker wouldn't leave her house without cigarettes and lighter. I'm thinking, yeah, this probably isn't a good situation." They classified the case as missing persons, foul play suspected. Bookout wrote a detailed report. Then he asked Janice for Stacy's dental records. Janice later said, quote, "I thought if they want dental records, they want to identify my daughter. They thought my daughter could be dead." Before leaving, the officers locked up the house and left a note. It instructed the women, if they returned, to call the police department to cancel the missing persons report. Janice asked how they were supposed to get back inside the house and call with the doors locked. The officer told her that was the point. They had to call to get the key back. When she asked how they would do that, he replied, "Don't worry, they'll find a way." Officer Rick Bookout's report was officially filed at 2:50 a.m. on Monday, June 8th. The report documented the condition of the house, early witness statements, and importantly, listed the people who had been inside the home before police arrived. By that point, roughly 18 people had gone in and out of the house throughout the day. They weren't suspects. They were friends and family, people acting in good faith, desperately trying to figure out where their loved ones were. But in doing so, they almost certainly compromised any evidence that had been left behind. Ashtrays were emptied, dishes were washed, and glass was swept away. Sherrill's sister Deborah later said, quote, "You have a dozen people in the house emptying ashtrays, cleaning coffee cups. Nobody could grasp that this was anything but a misunderstanding. Evidence, if it existed, was disappearing without anyone realizing it. One of the first unanswered questions centered on the broken porch light. The glass globe covering the light had shattered, while the bulb itself remained intact. What had happened? Was someone trying to unscrew the light and accidentally caused the globe to fall? Was it knocked down during a struggle? Or had it simply come loose on its own? A coincidence with chilling timing. After leaving the house, officers returned to the station and began making calls to local hospitals and jails, as well as those in surrounding counties. They were looking for any sign that the women had been arrested, admitted, or brought in for medical care. No one had seen them. Based on the condition of the house, Officer Bookout formed an early theory. He later said, quote, "In my opinion, it looked like the girls had come home. They went into the bedroom. It looked to me like everything was okay up to that point. I think things were normal when they got home. They went in, they were getting ready for bed. So whatever happened after that point." This assessment shaped how investigators approached the case moving forward. Law enforcement narrowed the critical window to sometime between 2:30 and 7:30 a.m., the time between when the girls got home and when phone calls that morning went unanswered. Beyond that window, investigators had very little to go on. When detectives returned to work later that morning, they began reconstructing the women's last known movements and identifying the people they'd last been seen with. At the time, Sergeant Mark Webb was hopeful. He said, quote, "In the beginning, I had every hope that we would solve this in a few days, that we'd find them, know what happened. I thought we'd get to the bottom of it." Police obtained a search warrant and conducted a full search of the home later that day. It produced no clear leads. Retired Springfield Police Captain Tony Glenn later reflected on the scene. Quote, "The only thing unusual about this house was that 3 women were missing from it. You had this feeling as you looked around that something was missing, that something had to be missing, but there wasn't. Just them." A 24-hour command post was established at Sherrill's home, and it would stay there for the next 3 weeks. Detective David Asher was assigned as lead investigator. He later said, quote, "It just looked like, and this is the word I've used ever since this happened, like they were taken up to heaven. They were just gone. The clothes, the keys, the cars, the purses, everything was there. No blood, no sense of violence. It didn't look to have been cleaned up, if you will, other than what Janice and the other people did while they were waiting on them to come home." Janice McCall did everything she could to get the word out. She contacted the media, determined to make sure people were looking for her daughter. By Tuesday, June 9th, the FBI had joined the investigation. They were soon followed by the Missouri State Highway Patrol and additional agencies. Tens of thousands of bright yellow missing posters bearing the faces of all 3 women were printed and distributed across Springfield. They appeared on telephone poles, storefronts, truck stops, gas stations, bars, and restaurants. There were billboards put up along busy roads. The case quickly moved beyond Springfield. By June 14th, the women were featured on America's Most Wanted. As police spoke with neighbors and friends of the women, a couple of details stood out. No neighbors reported hearing anything suspicious during the night. No screams, no crashes, no disturbances. Nigel, a friend of Susie's and co-worker from the movie theater, mentioned something that didn't feel right to her. She had described Suzie as a creature of habit. Sherrill's blue Chevy Corsica was parked under the carport, exactly where she always parked. But Susie's red Ford Escort wasn't where it normally would have been. Typically, Suzie parked directly behind her mother's car, so the cars were lined up in tandem. Nigel explained that Suzie only parked in the circular driveway if her mother's car wasn't already under the carport, or someone else had parked behind Sherrill's car, blocking the space. But Sherrill's car was already in the carport, so why hadn't Suzie parked behind her like she usually did? Was Sherrill's car not there when Suzie arrived home? Was another vehicle already occupying that space? Or did Suzie simply decide it was easier for Stacy to follow her into the circular drive and park behind her? Law enforcement has never publicly explained the placement of the cars, or whether they believe it's relevant. And to this day, that detail remains unanswered. In the days after Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy vanished, law enforcement launched an extensive search throughout the surrounding area, looking for any sign of the women. Springfield is bordered by fields, dense forests, ravines, and caves. Terrain that can swallow evidence quickly. Search teams combed through wooded areas on foot, on horseback, and on ATVs. Dive teams searched nearby rivers and lakes. No trace of the women was found. Within a week of the disappearance, law enforcement invited the community to join in organized searches. Volunteers flooded into wooded areas, walking shoulder to shoulder through brush and tree lines, hoping to spot anything that could bring answers. The public was deeply invested, too. Thousands of tips came in: possible sightings, possible burial locations, suspicious vehicles, strange men seen in neighborhoods. Police followed buzzard sightings, sometimes even out of state. They tracked down rumors, checked locations flagged in tips, and even followed leads from psychics. Nothing panned out. The Springfield Police Department also welcomed national media attention, hoping broader exposure would generate the one lead they were missing. Programs like 48 Hours and America's Most Wanted featured the case, pushing it into national awareness. And for Stacy's parents, that publicity came with a painful balancing act. They wanted the world to look for their daughter, but they also didn't want Stacy to see them falling apart. If she was still alive and being held somewhere. Janice said, quote, "If somebody was holding her against her will, and they showed her a video or newspaper of us all upset, it would be difficult for her. Even though we were crying all the time, we didn't want people to portray us that way. We didn't want that. We only thought of Stacy." At times, the pressure on law enforcement was visible. Robert Keyes, a reporter from the local newspaper, said, quote, "Every day they would have a press conference, and they just had nothing, and you could tell that they were stressed because they wanted people to believe that they were on it. But they weren't on it because they didn't have a clue what they were dealing with." In the weeks that followed, the McCall family set up a hotline to gather possible leads. Tips came in, so did weird calls, but nothing brought them closer to finding the women. As the case gained attention, tips poured in with potential sightings. Before we get into this, it's important to say this clearly. None of these sightings have officially been confirmed as the women, and many were investigated without producing evidence. But these reports mattered, especially in this case, because in the early days of the investigation, eyewitness information was all investigators had to work with. And in this case, some of the tips became so well known that they helped shape public theories for decades. One of the most pervasive tips came from a woman in East Springfield. She reported that in the early morning hours of Sunday, June 7th, the day the women disappeared, she was sitting on her porch watching the sunrise when an older 1960s to 1970s model Dodge van pulled into her driveway, or possibly the driveway next door. Different sources report it differently. In the passenger seat, she saw a man, and in the driver's seat, she saw a young blonde woman who looked terrified. She reported hearing the man tell the woman, "Don't do anything stupid." They then pulled out and left. After seeing photos of the missing women, the woman became convinced that the woman she saw driving the car was Suzie Streeter. She said it took her several days to come forward because she was scared. Interestingly, by the time she called police, they had already received several tips about an older model Dodge van. The color varied from blue to brown to green, but the make and model style was consistent. One of those additional reports came from a man sitting in his car in a grocery store parking lot, not far from Sherrill's home. He said he noticed an older model van with a young blonde woman sitting behind the wheel, as if she was waiting for someone inside the store. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something felt off. He said he wrote the license plate number down on a newspaper, just in case. But later, thinking it was nothing, he threw the newspaper away. Police hypnotized both witnesses, a technique more commonly used at the time in an attempt to retrieve details people couldn't consciously recall. Sometimes it helped, sometimes it didn't. The man was able to recall the first 3 digits of the license plate, but that was all. The porch witness wasn't able to recall much additional information. Another reported van sighting came from the dentist next door to Sherrill's house. He reportedly saw a van on the night of June 6th, on the street, but parked on his side of the fence. He hadn't seen it before. He said he saw 3 men about Sherrill's age, late 40s, outside talking and laughing with Sherrill. He had been frustrated because someone kept dumping trash on his side of the fence, and he thought maybe the people in the van were responsible. He went inside to grab a piece of paper and a pen to write down the license plate, but when he got back outside, they were gone. He filed a police report and was reportedly questioned by police, but never heard anything further. And adding to the swirl of uncertainty, 2 vehicles were reported stolen the night the women disappeared. One was a burgundy Toyota Supra, and the other was a dark blue Dodge van. On June 16th, 9 days after the disappearance, police released an image of a Dodge van similar to the one described. They checked registered vans matching the description and partial plate. They even got a similar van and parked it outside the police station, hoping it might trigger another witness's memory. No new credible lead came from it. On June 15th, police received a lead they considered credible. Neighbors reported seeing a man near the home in the days leading up to the disappearance, a man that they didn't recognize. Police described the man as transient, meaning he wasn't known to live in the area. Investigators released a sketch of a man with a full beard and long, thick hair, but the tip never led to an identification. On June 14th, about 2.5 weeks after the disappearance, police received another tip. A waitress at George's Steakhouse, a 24-hour diner, reported that she saw the three women between 1 and 3 a.m. on Sunday, June 7th. It was a restaurant Sherrill reportedly frequented, and the waitress said she recognized her. According to her account, the three women arrived together. She said Suzie seemed excited and intoxicated, and Sherrill tried to calm her down before they left together. Some reports say the waitress saw only the three women. Other reports say she saw the three women with three men. There's also an obvious timing problem to consider. Multiple witnesses confirmed that Stacy and Suzie left Battlefield between 2 and 2:15 a.m., meaning they would have arrived home between 2:15 and 2:30. If this sighting were true, it would mean that pretty immediately after the girls got home, they would have headed to the restaurant in order to be seen before 3 a.m., which is possible because George's was only about a mile away from Sherrill's house. Some people question this account, wondering how the women would have gone to a restaurant if their purses were found at the house. But it's also possible that they took their bags with them, went to the restaurant, and then came home before setting everything down and getting ready for bed. Another potential witness of interest came from a caller who reached out to the America's Most Wanted hotline on New Year's Eve. The call was disconnected while the caller was being transferred to Springfield Police Department. Authorities made public requests for the caller, believed to be a man, to contact them again because they believed he may have had vital information. They never heard from him. Some reports suggest the neighborhood was quiet that night. No suspicious sounds, no disturbances. But other reports mention nearby residents hearing screams and tires squealing. Some sources say law enforcement investigated those claims and found nothing. Other accounts suggest the information was reported, but nothing came from those reports. Soon after the disappearance, someone left a letter in a newspaper rack at a local grocery store. It was about a mile north of Sherrill's house. The letter included a drawing of the Boulevard Road apartments, about 6 miles from the East Delmar house, with the words, "Use ruse of gas man checking for leaks." Police checked the apartment complex, but found nothing. There was also a sighting from a gas station clerk who claimed he saw the women the night they disappeared. He said Suzie and Stacy entered the store, bought a few items, and then left in separate cars. He claimed Stacy was in an older gold-colored car with an older man, possibly in his 30s, with dark stringy hair and a mustache. He reported that the man popped his head into the store and said something about forgetting to buy cigarettes. The clerk said he overheard them making plans to meet up later that night, and then they left separately, heading in different directions. He also reported claiming that around 2:15 a.m., Sherrill came in, asking if he had seen Suzie and 2 friends. He said she seemed nervous, but his account is difficult to reconcile with the known timeline. Friends who were with Suzie and Stacy during the timeline he claimed he saw them said they had not stopped at a gas station that night and they did not leave until after 2 a.m. Another detail adds to the uncertainty. The clerk's description of the man came after police had released the sketch of the man they described as transient, and he claimed his description matched that sketch. Over the years, many additional sightings have been reported, but none have been confirmed by law enforcement. And with how widely publicized this case became, and how recognizable the women's faces were in the months and years after, it's difficult to imagine them living normal lives for decades, only to be spotted once by a single person. So these accounts remain what they've always been. Possible clues, heavily debated, but unproven. When a case grows this large, especially one that attracts national media attention and remains unsolved, questions about the investigation are almost inevitable. The Springfield Three case is no exception. From the very beginning, law enforcement was working at a disadvantage. Police weren't alerted to the women's disappearance until roughly 14 to 19 hours after whatever happened inside the house had already occurred. By then, the scene had been severely compromised. Approximately 18 people had gone in and out of the home before police arrived, well-meaning friends and family just trying to find their loved ones. But in doing so, they unintentionally disturbed what little evidence may have existed. Surfaces were touched, ashtrays were emptied, dishes were done, glass was swept away. Anything fragile, fingerprints, fibers, subtle disturbances were likely lost. Even within the department, there was later acknowledgement that the investigation didn't immediately move at full speed. Mark Webb, a Springfield police officer who worked crimes against persons, later said, quote, "There was a lag there of at least a day before it really got rolling. In a case where minutes and hours mattered, that delay would later loom large." There's no question the Springfield Police Department devoted significant resources and manpower to the case. But over time, seasoned investigators began questioning how the investigation was being managed, specifically under Police Chief Terry Knowles. Knowles had joined the department about 3 years earlier, after more than 2 decades with the FBI. He was experienced and highly credentialed, but several detectives later said they felt micromanaged, restricted in how they could pursue leads, despite their experience. Some claimed Knowles personally ruled out potential suspects they believed had not fully been cleared, sometimes after informal conversations. The broader feeling among many investigators was that leadership did not trust them to run the case. George Larby, who was the president of the Springfield Police Officers Association at the time, said, quote, "If your highest command tells you how it's going to be, simply put, that's how it's going to be." Detectives felt powerless. The newer guys wouldn't have any idea what was going on, that this wasn't normally the way we did business. Investigative briefings were often held in the chief's conference room. It was reported that some detectives felt discouraged from sharing tips with one another. Instead of developing leads organically, some investigators said they were given tip cards to follow up on, a structure they were not accustomed to. Doug Thomas, who was an investigator at the time, later said, quote, "It was no longer a CIS or Criminal Investigation Section case. It was a case run out of the administration. Investigative decisions were made out of the chief's conference room. The line was blurred because we hadn't done that before. For many involved, this was the largest and most complex case they had ever worked, and likely ever would. Those concerns also extended beyond police." Daryl Moore, an assistant prosecutor at the time, said, quote, "This was clearly the most micromanaged case I've ever seen. Seasoned detectives were not allowed to use their experience and judgment in this investigation. This is the only case where that happened, and I don't understand that. Other chiefs and sheriffs have let the guys run with the investigation." Moore also recalled a specific incident that troubled him deeply. Quote, "In the beginning, that's how it was handled. The chief certainly had a great background in law enforcement on the federal side. He had been FBI. But most investigations like this, you leave it to the trained investigators who report to you. You ask questions and you might provide guidance. But in the beginning, he essentially micromanaged the whole investigation. And I think on this occasion, I know, frustrated the trained investigators. And of course, that was an incident where I think the chief took one of the suspects out for a cheeseburger at McDonald's and based on that conversation, decided they were not suspects." Chief Knowles has consistently pushed back on the idea that his leadership style damaged the investigation. He acknowledged being hands-on, but denied micromanaging detectives or restricting their work. He said, quote, "I don't recall that being an issue back then. What anyone wants to say 10 years later, I can't control that. It's certainly disappointing, and it's frustrating at the time to be doing everything you possibly can. Cases don't always work out the way you want them to. How you feel 10 years later is immaterial. How I feel now will not help solve this case." Ron Worsham, who served as Knowles' assistant chief at the time, also defended how the case was handled. He said, quote, "Who else would you want doing the investigation? The best people at the department ran the investigation. We didn't let investigators just run and do whatever they wanted. I don't know how anybody can criticize. For those who do that, they have psychological problems." Another major concern involved media access, particularly national outlets. Programs like 48 Hours were given unprecedented access to the investigation. That included footage of suspects undergoing polygraph examinations, something that stunned members of the prosecutor's office. Daryl Moore said, quote, "That's a total violation of the disciplinary rules. We can't even say whether or not polygraphs have been done, much less allow the media to film it." At one point, a newspaper published images of an investigative board containing tips and case information. Typically, investigators keep certain details private, both to protect the integrity of the investigation and to avoid tipping off a potential suspect. Some prosecutors worried that releasing too much information could later undermine a case in court. Moore said, quote, "If the defense was alleging police misconduct, it would have been true. But that was done by one person, the chief." Chief Knowles has defended those decisions as well. He argued that media exposure was essential, especially if the women were still alive. Getting their faces in front of as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, could generate tips from outside the Springfield area. There was also a concern early on that this could be a serial crime, a possibility that made broader information sharing feel urgent. Another criticism that has persisted over the years is the belief that some suspects were cleared too early, particularly if they passed a polygraph test. Police have pushed back on that characterization, stating that no one has been officially cleared. Still, the perception remains. Whether these issues ultimately change the outcome of the case is something that no one can say with certainty. What is clear is that the Springfield Three investigation unfolded under extraordinary pressure, public, internal, and national, and that the earliest hours were marked by confusion, compromise, and competing priorities. And those early decisions continue to shape the way the case is viewed today. In the decades since Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McCall disappeared, the investigation has never officially stopped. Investigators have worked through more than 5,000 tips, compiled tens of thousands of documents, administered polygraphs to numerous potential suspects, and followed leads not only locally, but across 21 different states. According to Springfield Police spokesperson Lisa Cox, quote, "The case has never been suspended and has always been assigned to at least one of our detectives who follows up on the ongoing incoming tips." Between 2010 and 2012, investigators conducted a comprehensive review of the case. That review led to a presentation before a panel of experts brought in by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The panel reportedly made recommendations to Springfield investigators. Those recommendations were said to have been taken seriously and incorporated, but they have never been released publicly. In 1997, Springfield police transitioned the case from a full-time investigation to a part-time one. Tips continued to be accepted and followed up on, but the case no longer had a full-time dedicated investigative team. That year, another painful milestone was reached. Sherrill Levitt and Suzie Streeter were declared legally dead at the request of their family. Janice and Stu McCall chose not to have Stacy declared dead. They were not ready to give up hope. Over the years, investigators also released age progression images in an effort to keep the case visible. In 2012, images were created showing what Sherrill might look like at age 68. In 2017, updated images depicted what Suzie and Stacy might look like in their early 40s, ages 44 and 43. These images served a dual purpose, reminding the public that the women were still missing and acknowledging the passage of time in a case that now spanned decades. Despite the passage of time, the unanswered questions remain the same. No arrests, no confirmed sightings. No definitive explanation about what happened inside the house in the early morning hours of June 7th, 1992. And that brings us to the part of the case that continues to generate the most debate. With what we know, and just as importantly, what we don't know, investigators, journalists, and the public have spent more than 30 years trying to answer one central question. What happened to the Springfield Three? Next, we'll walk through the leading theories. Not as speculation for speculation's sake, but as an attempt to understand how this crime may have happened, and who may have been responsible. Before we talk about specific suspects, it's important to start with what investigators broadly agree on, because those assumptions shape many of the theories that follow. First, investigators believe it was likely a single perpetrator. That conclusion aligns with the assessment from an FBI behavioral profiler who reviewed the case. While some people argue that it would be difficult for one person to control all three women, investigators have pointed out that a firearm would have made that much easier. It's also worth remembering that all three women were very petite. They wouldn't have necessarily needed to be physically overpowered in order to be controlled. They only needed to believe that they were. Another factor investigators consider is time. In many cases involving multiple perpetrators, someone often talks eventually. It's been more than 33 years, and no credible confession involving accomplices has ever surfaced. Also, this does not appear to have been a robbery. Nothing of value was taken from the house, including nearly $900 in cash in Sherrill's purse, which would be roughly $2,100 today. The only things missing were the women themselves. And finally, investigators believe whoever took them had a large vehicle, capable of transporting 3 adults. At this point in the case, nearly everyone agrees on one core fact. Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy were taken from the home. The real mystery isn't whether they left voluntarily. It's who took them, why they were taken, and what happened afterward. So instead of a traditional theories list, first we're going to walk through the main motive-based possibilities that investigators have considered over the years. One long-standing theory is that Sherrill Levitt was the primary target. Over the years, rumors have circulated suggesting she may have been involved in selling illegal substances. But people who knew Sherrill strongly deny that. Her former boss said police directly asked him whether Sherrill was selling illegal substances. He told them absolutely not. Sherrill was focused on her work, fixing up her new home, and caring for her daughter. It's possible those rumors stemmed from the amount of cash found in her purse. But according to her boss, the salon didn't have a credit card machine, and it wasn't unusual for stylists to carry large amounts of cash. Another reason investigators have considered Sherrill as the target is timing. She was expected to be the only one home that night. Suzie and Stacy staying there was a last-minute decision. But that raises an important question. Who would have known that? Was that information widely shared, or was it simply assumed because it was graduation night? Investigators have also considered whether Suzie Streeter was the target. Suzie had prior conflicts in her life that could have put her at risk, including past relationships and social connections that raised questions for investigators. However, this theory runs into a similar problem. Suzie was not supposed to be home that night. If she was the target, did the perpetrator expect her to be there anyway? Did someone follow her from a party? Or did the crime unfold opportunistically rather than through planning? We'll explore these possibilities and the people connected to them more fully in a little bit. Another possibility is that both Sherrill and Suzie were the intended targets. They were the permanent residents of the house, the two people most logically expected to be there. Under this theory, Stacy becomes collateral damage, present simply because plans changed at the last minute. Some believe the crime may have been entirely random. Is it possible someone saw Suzie and Stacy driving home from Battlefield that night and followed them? This theory doesn't require prior knowledge of who lived in the house or who should have been there that night. It was just an opportunity. But it does raise other questions about timing, familiarity with the home, and control once inside. There's also a less discussed but intriguing possibility. The house itself was the target. Sherrill and Suzie were relatively new to the house. It's been suggested the previous occupants may have been the original targets. Sherrill and Suzie had reportedly been receiving prank calls after moving into the house. While prank calls were common at the time, in hindsight, they raise uncomfortable questions. Was someone targeting the address rather than the people inside it? What complicates every motive-based theory is the same unavoidable fact. Plans changed at the last minute. Suzie and Stacy weren't supposed to be there. If one person had been the target, it means the others were collateral damage. And that brings us to the next layer of analysis. Because once you start asking why this happened, the next logical question is, who could have done it? Now let's talk about specific names that have come up during the investigation. Some were investigated because of their connections to the three women. Others surfaced because of their criminal history, proximity, or tips that investigators received. And I want to be clear, none of the people I'm about to talk about have ever been charged or convicted with any crime related to the disappearance of Sherrill, Stacy, or Suzie. Before we go further, I want to give a disclaimer that I will be very briefly mentioning SA and DV in the upcoming section. Please skip ahead if needed. One person police looked at was Stacy's ex-boyfriend, Mike Kovacs. It's been reported that he allegedly harmed Suzie physically, and she obtained a temporary restraining order against him. There were also reports that he slashed her tires, and Suzie was reportedly afraid of him. Mike's alibi was that he was alone that night and the early morning hours when the women disappeared. He reportedly took a polygraph test and passed, though it's important to note that polygraphs aren't admissible in court and do not reliably prove truthfulness. He was reportedly eliminated fairly early as a suspect, despite the alleged history between him and Suzie. Another of Suzie's ex-boyfriend was also tied to the case, Dustin Rekla. In February 1992, he was charged with breaking into a mausoleum with a couple of friends and stealing gold fillings from a corpse's mouth. The fillings were worth about $30 at the time, or around $70 today. They were arrested and charged with vandalism. Suzie broke up with him quickly after this happened and gave police a statement detailing what she knew about his involvement. He was released pending trial, and it was unclear whether Suzie would have been called to testify against him. Later, witnesses came forward saying they overheard Dustin and one of his friends that was with him at the mausoleum, Michael, make violent comments about Suzie, including an alleged statement that they wanted Suzie dead. Some accounts also claim that Michael said he wished all three dead: Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy. One issue with that alleged statement, though, is timing. Suzie and Stacy hadn't been close until just a couple of weeks before graduation, so why Stacy would have been included in that has never been explained. And to be clear, these witness statements have never been publicly verified. There were also claims that Dustin and his friends were involved in satanic rituals, something else that has never been confirmed. And it's important to note that this happened during the era of satanic panic, which swept the country in the 1980s and 1990s and is now largely considered an unfounded modern-day witch hunt. Dustin took a polygraph in June 1992 and reportedly passed. He was ultimately convicted of vandalism and received a suspended sentence with probation. Sherrill's estranged son, Bart Streeter, has also been mentioned over the years. He was in his mid-20s at the time and had a tumultuous relationship with Sherrill. He later said he was grateful for her, though. She taught him how to be hardworking and responsible, even if they had their problems. He had gotten in trouble with the law, often connected to heavy drinking. Bart grew up in Washington State and struggled to adjust to life in Springfield, and eventually he left. In the fall of 1991, he returned to Springfield after a difficult breakup. He wanted to repair his relationship with Sherrill and Suzie, and he lived with them from September 1991 until January or February 1992. They hadn't had much, if any, contact since. He wasn't invited to Suzie's graduation on June 6th, and said he didn't even know about it until police talked to him after their disappearance. He told investigators he had been drinking heavily that night and passed out. Bart was reportedly devastated after Sherrill and Suzie disappeared. He said he didn't know Stacy, but he felt terrible for her family. He also reportedly passed a polygraph. After the disappearance, Bart said the stress consumed him. He quit his job and left Springfield. Interestingly, despite Bart saying that he had been named as a potential suspect, he didn't feel he was thoroughly investigated. He claimed police never searched his car or house, he wasn't interviewed by the FBI, and wasn't asked for DNA until the early 2000s. Another name that comes up is Gerald Carnahan. Carnahan was a suspect in the 1985 homicide of 20-year-old waitress and beauty queen Jackie Johns. Her abandoned car was found in a convenience store parking lot, with her bloody clothing and belongings inside. Her body was later recovered from Lake Springfield. Carnahan was considered a prime suspect at the time. He reportedly knew Jackie, and witnesses placed him near the location where her car was found. Law enforcement believed he'd SA'd and killed her, but said there wasn't enough evidence at the time to charge him. He was also connected to the 1987 death of Debbie Lewis, another case involving an abandoned car and remains found months later, though he was not charged in that case either. In 1993, Carnahan was convicted of attempting to kidnap an 18-year-old woman from the sidewalk in Springfield and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. In 2007, with improvements in forensic testing, Carnahan was linked to Jackie Johns and is currently serving life in prison for her SA and murder. He's been mentioned as a possible person of interest in the Springfield Three case, mostly based on his criminal history. Daryl Moore said, quote, "There was never any strong evidence indicating that Gerald Carnahan had had anything to do with the 3 missing women. If you look at what Gerald did in terms of Jackie Johns, it was actually sloppy. And I think some of us are skeptical that Gerald, at least Gerald by himself, could have been organized enough to take all 3 women." Carnahan has denied any involvement in the Springfield Three case. A more speculative name that appears in discussions is Larry Dwayne Hall. Hall is a suspected serial killer who has been linked to dozens of cases beginning in the early 1980s. He has confessed and then later recanted to 35 murders, and some authorities believe the number of potential victims could be as high as 50. He was living in Indiana at the time, roughly 550 miles or 880 kilometers from Springfield, which makes him a difficult fit geographically. However, he and his brother were well-known Civil War reenactment enthusiasts, and they reportedly traveled to Springfield from time to time for events. He is currently serving life in prison for kidnapping and has not been convicted in any of the other cases, though he remains a suspect in many. Like Carnahan, he's largely connected to the Springfield Three case through criminal history and possible ties to the area, not through publicly released evidence tying him to the specific disappearance. Stephen Garrison is another figure tied to the case through claims he made while in custody. In 1993, he was in jail on a weapons charge when he claimed he knew what happened to the women. He struck a deal: more information in exchange for being released. He told investigators he overheard someone confessing to killing the women and claimed their bodies were taken to a hog farm in Webster County, just east of Springfield. He reportedly provided details that had not been released publicly. A judge lowered his bail. Police reportedly paid for a hotel room, and he was released. He immediately disappeared. Days later, he attacked, SA'd, and robbed a young college student in her home in Springfield. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 40 years. This was reportedly a big embarrassment for the police department. Understandably. Police reportedly served search warrants in the areas Garrison mentioned. They found no evidence connected to the Springfield Three. The most widely discussed suspect in this case is Robert Craig Cox. He grew up in Springfield and was living there at the time of the disappearance. He has a lengthy and deeply troubling criminal history. In 1985, in California, he was convicted of kidnapping 2 women in 2 separate events. In one case, he followed a young woman who was driving her car, attacked her as she was getting out of the car, held a knife to her throat, and told her if she screamed, he would kill her. She was injured during the attack, but she was able to get away. In the other case, Cox asked a woman, who was an active Army member, for a ride from the airport to the base. She agreed, and on the way, he pulled a firearm on her and told her to drive to the mountains instead. The woman convinced him to stop by a friend's house first, where police were called and he was arrested. He was charged and convicted of both crimes and sentenced to 9 years in prison. While incarcerated in California, he was brought to Florida to stand trial for another crime, the 1978 SA and homicide of 19-year-old Sharon Zellers. Sharon was working at Disney World in one of the gift shops on December 30th, 1978. She wasn't originally even supposed to work that night, but she was asked to come in to cover someone else's shift. She left work at around 10 p.m. and disappeared. 5 days later, Sharon's severely beaten body was found in a sewer. Robert Craig Cox, who was an Army Ranger and also 19 years old at the time, was in town with his family on vacation, and the motel where they were staying was less than 350 feet or 106 meters from where Sharon's body was found. On the night of December 30th, the same night that Sharon went missing, he left the motel, only to return with his mouth severely bleeding. A piece of his tongue was bitten off, and he claimed he accidentally bit it off himself. After her disappearance, police found Sharon's car, and they found a boot print matching a military boot, similar to what Cox wore. Although DNA evidence wouldn't be widely used for a decade, blood and hair samples found by investigators were considered to be consistent with Cox. It took 10 years to get the case to court. But at trial, a nurse testified that due to the direction of the teeth marks in the wound in his tongue, it would have had to come from another person. Sharon's parents believe she bit off Cox's tongue. Her mother, Dorothy, said, quote, "She fought for her life." Cox was convicted and sentenced to death. While he was on death row, the conviction was reversed due to the Florida Supreme Court not believing there had been enough evidence for him to have been convicted. So in 1989, he was released. Sharon's parents were devastated and frightened. Her father, Steve, said, quote, "We told them he would kill again." Cox also had potential ties to the women. After moving back, he reportedly worked at the same car dealership as Stacy's father, though it's unclear whether they ever interacted. It was reportedly a large dealership. By the summer of 1992, he was working for a utility company. Within weeks of the women's disappearance, Cox came onto investigators' radar. In fact, it was Sharon Zeller's parents who contacted Springfield police. When they heard about 3 women vanishing in Cox's hometown, they immediately thought of him. Sharon's parents kept track of Cox after he was released, and that's how they learned he had returned to Springfield and was living there in June of 1992. Dorothy said, quote, "I just knew it was him. I just knew it. I said to myself, Cox did this." Steve said, quote, "It's always been in the back of our minds. What happened to these women? I feel so bad for the families. As bad as our situation is, at least Sharon was found. To not know where they are or where they were, I can't imagine." When Cox was interviewed in June 1992, he initially claimed that he had been at church with his girlfriend the morning of the disappearance, an alibi police believed to be solid at the time. Later, it emerged that his girlfriend had lied, and she said she didn't actually know where he was during that time frame. One of the reasons Robert Craig Cox continues to be discussed as a person of interest in this case isn't just his criminal history. It's statements he's made in the years since the women disappeared. Cox has repeatedly suggested that he knows what happened, without ever providing details that investigators can verify. In one interview, he told a reporter, quote, "I know that they're dead. I'll say that. I know that. I believe that the person who did this had experience in what they were doing. I believe that the 3 missing women are buried close to Springfield." Over time, Cox's statements have been inconsistent. At points, he has claimed that he worked utility routes near East Delmar Street, the neighborhood where the women vanished. At other times, he has said he worked all over Springfield and can't remember whether he was ever in that specific area. He has also made claims that he will reveal the locations of the women's bodies after his mother dies, a statement that investigators and journalists have viewed with skepticism, but one that has continued to keep his name tied to the case. That leaves a central question investigators and families have wrestled with for decades. Was Cox involved, or was he inserting himself into a high-profile case for attention? In 1995, Cox was arrested in Texas for aggravated robbery. He was convicted, and he has been incarcerated ever since. Several people close to the case have said they believe Cox is responsible. Cliff Williams, brother of Sherrill's father, Jim Williams, said, quote, "Jim told me, I'm sure that's the guy. I just don't know if they'll be able to prove it." Janice, Stacy's mom, said, quote, "I would like him, if he knows something, to tell what he knows. He's going to be in prison for another 20 years. His appeals are gone by the wayside. He said that they were dead and buried around Springfield. How does he know that? I don't know if he'll ever give up the right information. I want to know where my daughter is." Police have consistently said that Cox is a person of interest, but not the only one. Sergeant Mike Owen said, quote, "All our eggs are not in Cox's basket. We're still looking at lots of different people. If tomorrow we had a lead and solved this case and it wasn't Cox, I wouldn't be surprised." So those are the most commonly cited persons of interest, ranging from people connected to Suzie's life, to violent offenders in the area, to names attached to the case through tips and speculation. Next, we'll shift away from individual names and look at the broader scenario-based theories. Where people believe the women may have been taken, what may have happened after they left the house, and why some ideas have persisted for decades despite little evidence. Some of these scenarios began as credible tips. Others became internet lore over time, and some were investigated thoroughly and led nowhere, but continue to circulate because the case has never had closure. One of the most repeated theories online is that the women are buried under a hospital parking garage. This theory gained momentum after a tip that came in 2006. Kathy Baird brought information to police after she hired a ground-penetrating radar engineer to scan an area of a parking garage at Cox South Hospital. According to those involved, the scan showed 3 anomalies that could be burial sites. So then the question came, how did anyone arrive at that exact place? Well, the origin of the tip reportedly traces back to a psychic. And according to Springfield Police spokesperson Lisa Cox, Kathy Baird, quote, provided no evidence of logical reasoning behind this theory at the time or since then. She has also raised additional concerns, including that some individuals have denied saying what was attributed to them by Kathy Baird, and that a professor disputed whether the technology described could scan the area the way it was claimed. There's also a major practical issue. Construction on the garage didn't begin until September 1993, roughly 15 months after the disappearances. And while this theory gets repeated constantly online, it doesn't align with how construction actually works. Parking garages aren't built by simply pouring concrete over undisturbed ground. A structure like that requires excavation, foundations, grading, utilities, inspections, and weeks, sometimes months, of heavy site work. If anything had been buried beneath the site, it almost certainly would have been discovered during the preparation and build process. The hospital reportedly gave Springfield police permission to excavate the site, but of course at the department's expense. Lisa Cox said, quote, "Digging up the area and subsequently reconstructing the structure would be extremely costly. And without any reasonable belief that the bodies could be located here, it is illogical to do so. And for those reasons, SPD does not intend to." She said investigators have deemed the tip not credible. David Millsap, who has worked on the case, said, quote, "I can tell you that the rumor of being buried at Cox and all that type of stuff is just, again, that information that gets out there and runs rampant on the internet that has no basis of truth. The person that threw the information out there about the bodies being buried at the parking lot of Cox Hospital, we interviewed her, and the story of how that comes from a psychic and really has been a discredit to this investigation that rumor was even put out there." What other scenarios have investigators spent time on? That brings us to one of the most common possibilities in missing persons cases that are likely homicides: disposal on rural or private land. Springfield is surrounded by rural property, farmland, wooded lots, ravines, and remote areas where a vehicle can travel unnoticed. Over the years, investigators have repeatedly searched private land based on tips, informants, and witness reports. Many of those searches became public. Some did not. Here are the main private land leads that have surfaced publicly. One of the most referenced search areas is Webster County, east of Springfield. Investigators reportedly searched farmland there after information from an informant. Police acknowledged finding items at the scene, but did not elaborate. There were also later searches in the county that were described as being prompted by new leads. There is a Webster County-related theory that involves a hog farm, connected to a tip given to police by Stephen Garrison. Investigators reportedly searched the site in 1993, but found nothing to corroborate the claim. Police reportedly took the information seriously in part because the property owner was said to have been convicted of murder. He reportedly later died in 1995. Another significant set of searches took investigators to Barry County, near the town of Cassville, roughly an hour and 20 minutes southwest of Springfield. Over the years, multiple tips have led investigators back to the same general area, particularly an old farm property and abandoned farmhouse. One version of the tip alleged that a green van was involved, and that both the van and the women's bodies were buried on the property. Investigators conducted extensive searches at the site. They reportedly tore up the flooring inside the abandoned farmhouse, and dug both inside and outside of the structure. Cadaver dogs reportedly showed interest in certain areas of the property. During the searches, investigators dug up tires, trash, a motorcycle, and parts of a green vehicle. There was also reporting that investigators encountered what appeared to be blood evidence connected to the farmhouse. Blood samples taken from the abandoned house were sent to a lab for testing. That blood was tested and determined to be human, but it did not belong to any of the 3 missing women. No evidence tying the property to the Springfield Three was ever confirmed. This is one of the recurring themes in this case. Searches happened, but searches are not answers. A dig can uncover something without uncovering the truth. Some investigators and observers believe the women could be buried in remote forest land, including areas around Mark Twain National Forest. This idea persists largely because of the scale and isolation of the terrain, but there has never been publicly confirmed information tied to this case. Some tips led investigators to bodies of water, including Bull Shoals Lake. Those searches produced animal remains and pieces of clothing, but the clothing did not match what the women were believed to have been wearing. Another report involved Stockton Lake, where a fisherman claimed he pulled up what looked like blonde hair while baiting a hook, but investigators determined it was a type of moss. When you zoom out, these private land theories aren't one theory, they're a category, because rural disposal is one of the few ways that crimes like this can stay hidden for decades. But then the question comes, how did the perpetrator get into the house in the first place? Since there were no clear signs of forced entry, many people have wondered how a perpetrator gained access. People close to Sherrill believe she wouldn't simply open the door for a stranger. So was it someone she knew? Someone she would have opened the door for? That's one possibility. But there's another. A ruse. One of the most discussed ruse theories involves Cinnamon, the family's Yorkie. The backyard fence wasn't tall, just over 3 feet, or just under a meter. It could have been easy for someone to reach over, grab Cinnamon, and then come to the door with a believable story. Is this your dog? I found him running down the street. I didn't want him to get hit by a car. If Sherrill opened the door for someone who she thought was a good Samaritan, the offender could have gained control quickly. There are some problems with this theory, though. Sherrill's bed looked slept in. Susie's bed did too. So when would someone have had access to Cinnamon outside? Would he have barked at a stranger? Small dogs often do. There was also the note left in the newspaper box with the words, "Use ruse of gas man checking for leak." But that tip has always been strange. Why would a perpetrator leave instructions where someone else would easily find them? And would it be believable for a gas employee to show up unprompted in the very early morning hours of a Sunday? So if it wasn't a ruse, another possibility is even more unsettling. Another scenario is that someone was already inside the house when Suzie and Stacy arrived, and possibly already had Sherrill under control. We don't know what time Sherrill went to bed. We do know that she was on the phone with her friend until about 11:15 p.m., so it would have had to be sometime after that. If someone entered the home at some point before Suzie and Stacy arrived, around 2:30 a.m., it's possible they wouldn't have realized anything was wrong until they were already in bed. But this theory also has its problems. Nigel, the friend and coworker of Suzie's, someone who had spent the night at her house multiple times, had described Suzie as a creature of habit. She said she always went into Sherrill's room to let her know she was home, even if Sherrill was already asleep. If Suzie did the same thing that night, she would have immediately noticed that Sherrill was under someone's control, and likely wouldn't have gotten into bed. And if someone Sherrill knew intended to stay in the house overnight, there was no evidence found of a planned sleeping setup, and no sign of a fourth person's belongings. No indication that someone else was settling in. Of course, it doesn't rule out this scenario completely, but it does make it harder to picture. One of the more disturbing claims connected to this case comes from an anonymous comment posted online, describing a violent incident near Camp Winoka. This area near Lake Springfield has long been treated by local teenagers as a haunted spot, a place people would go at night to party and scare themselves. This comment has circulated online for years, and the writer claims that they saw 3 women with 3 men near a van late at night, and believes the women were the Springfield Three. They said they heard them being harmed and then taken away. The comment appeared on a blog run by Kathy Baird, the person connected to the hospital parking garage theory. This story has been heavily debated online, especially by locals, including questions about whether the location described even matches Camp Winoka at all, and concerns about other inaccuracies in the story, and also some comments that it reads like fan fiction. There is also the issue of reporting. The writer does not describe contacting police at the time, a major reason why many people doubt it. Some members of law enforcement have acknowledged that they looked into the claim, but investigators have never confirmed any connection between the claim and the Springfield Three case. And the tip has not moved the case forward. In a case like this, it's understandable why so many people would grasp at straws that feel like answers. But investigators can't build a case on what can't be verified. After more than 3 decades, many people, including those in law enforcement, have said they fear the full truth may only come out through a deathbed confession. Others believe investigators may suspect who is responsible, but lack the evidence to prosecute. And when you put the theories together, side by side, a consistent theme emerges. Someone targeted the home, or someone inside it, and carried out a rapid, organized abduction with no witnesses and no forensic trail. What we still don't know is if any of these scenarios reflect the truth, and that's why this case has never stopped haunting Springfield. More than 3 decades later, the families of Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McCall have never stopped searching for answers about what happened on the morning of June 7, 1992. In 1994, Stacy's parents, Janice and Stu McCall, created One Missing Link, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families of missing loved ones. In 1997, a memorial bench was dedicated to Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy in the Victims Memorial Garden at Phelps Grove Park in Springfield, a place for remembrance in the community they called home. And even after more than 33 years, with no confirmed sightings and no answers, Stacy's family has not given up hope. Several years ago, Janice said, quote, "I expected her home that night, the next day, maybe a couple of days afterward. Never in my wildest imagination did I ever think it would be 25 years later, and I would still be saying Stacy is missing." Sherrill's sister, Debbie Schwartz, shared, quote, "The pain feels fresh and new. It's amazing it can feel so new after so long. I'm sure it will be that way until my dying day." In 2025, Stacy's family launched a GoFundMe to help increase the reward for information leading to the arrest and prosecution of whoever is responsible. The reward is currently $43,000. If you'd like to help, I'll include the link in the description. In October 2025, Stacy's father, Stu McCall, passed away. He died without ever knowing what happened to his daughter. Janice has said, quote, "If the police still follow every lead that comes in and follow it to its end, one of these days we'll find out. Somebody knows. If you have any information, no matter how small it may seem, please contact Springfield Police Department at 417-864-1810 or submit a tip to them online. I will have the link in the description. You can also contact Crime Stoppers of Springfield at 417-869-TIPS. Credible tips from the public remain one of the most powerful tools in solving cold cases, especially when physical evidence is limited. If you know something, please say something. Their families deserve answers. If you'd like to learn more about this case, I highly recommend the podcast Ozark's True Crime. There is a series on the Springfield Three from 2021, and it goes into so much more depth than I was able to here. And if you're looking for another missing persons case, one where someone seemed to vanish without a trace, I recommend checking out my episode on Kyron Horman next. I'll leave it linked here and in the description. Thanks for being here. Thanks for caring, and I'll see you in the next episode.